So, Elden Ring released this month, and it sparked a lot of conversations about user experience and game design. There's some really healthy discussion going on right now, which is great, but there's also a troubling amount of armchair UX experts. I've been seeing a lot of misinformation and a lot of misinterpretations about what UX actually is, and it makes me sad. Deeply sad. I love UX, it's my career. I've been a user experience designer for almost 4 years, so I feel personally like I want to set some records straight and tell you today about user experience in the Fromsoft series, and broadly, games as a medium. Now, if you like the video, please give me a like here on YouTube, comment with your own observations about the world of Fromsoft and its usability, and subscribe to me. I make videos as often as I can, game rankings, reviews, PlayStation discussion, and if you'd like to see more UX deep dives, let me know. Anyway, on to the video. This is going to be a bit more of a serious one than I normally do, but I am passionate about UX, so it is time to be serious. So, what is UX? UX stands for user experience, and in the broadest sense of the term, it refers to the measure of friction between a user and their goal. And when I say a user and their goal, I don't mean like the number of bosses or the quality of bosses. I don't mean a goal like reaching Gwyn or linking the first flame. Those are game design goals. I mean it in the meta sense. A user plays a game to have fun, so having fun is their end goal as far as UX is concerned. A user can have fun in many ways. They might be a speedrunner, they might be a casual enjoyer, they might be an explorer, a role player, a PvP expert, a player who is returning after many years, so on and so forth. PC players, console players, both of those are types of user as well. These categories of users are called personas in UX research. Projects will have tons of personas, especially in gaming where there are tens if not hundreds of different player types to account for, and they are used to frame the design, prioritize features, and direct the game during development. Saying that, I wonder if the persona development team calls their personas, or if that's too confusing. Anyway, every persona has different needs, wants, goals, and hang-ups. So let's look at the speedrunner persona, for example. A speedrunner's goal is to make different characters that they can use to rush through the game fast. They don't care about world building, lore, weapon variation, they grab what they grab. This is how they meet their ultimate goal of fun, by refining routes and testing themselves repeatedly. Speedrunners might need a game that runs well without crashes and loads competently, as they'll be smashing games faster than the average user. It's in the developer's best interests to accommodate needs, as needs are usually unconscious to a user. It's not something they specifically ask for, it's something they kind of expect on a fundamental level, and their fundamental experience is affected by needs not being met. Speedrunners, for example, might want the ability to make lots of different save slots for each attempt, and to be able to delete those save slots, while other user personas, like explorers or completionists, might just have one character in one save slot but spend hundreds of hours on them. Speedrunners might also want immediate feedback from button inputs, even in menus. Some games, like Crash Team Racing, make you wait a second after pausing the game before you can press anything, including restarting the race attempt. This might be an intentional move on part of the developers because it forces you to slow down if you're getting wound up. Speedrunners might want this to be different. A developer can choose to ignore wants if they prefer. Wants are typically things that you see people complaining about, whereas if a game doesn't fit their basic needs, they just won't play it at all. A speedrunner's hang-ups might be more fundamental, like shorter loading times, character creation ease, route refinement ease, hitboxes, timing, animations, consistency, the technical stuff that the other personas won't bother with. They might be more want-based, like only having one slot at a time for a character and having to delete that character every time they want to try a new speedrun, or not being able to delete characters at all. This hang-up might overlap with a PvP persona who also wants lots of characters, all with different builds. A developer might only account for the most basic user when they're making their game. They might just account for a brand new user, and therefore make cutscenes that can't be skipped or tutorials that go on far too long. They might only account for advanced users and make a sequel that doesn't stand on its own and is inaccessible to new users. Ultimately, it is up to the developer who they want to account for, but a good developer is one who accounts for as many personas as possible and builds their game around that research right from the beginning. Because UX is fundamental. You need it from the ground up or it's not going to work. It's not about slapping a bunch of help text on at the end of the project. It's about building the entire project, doing research along the way, looping back every now and again to fix things in a cycle. Not like the cycle of life and and death, this cycle is called iteration. Iteration is really important in UX, as there's often no blanket correct direction to take with UX. Some things work for some projects that don't work for others, but you don't know until you've prototyped it and tested it with lots of different users. I can't tell you how many times I've been pulled into meetings and been asked to do the UX on a website in front of me, and how annoyed people get when you ask them if they've actually spoken to any users. Because often they haven't, and they just assume you know the UX for every little problem. Sure, best practices exist, but you would be surprised how often solutions have to be tailored for each individual case. Often something will work well and you could stop there, but you iterate it with a slight difference and find this new solution works 10 times better. Slapping UX on at the end of a project's build period means it will be clumsy, awkward, and will probably break the flow of the experience more than if it wasn't there in the first place. Such as with Doom Eternal's demon pop-ups, where they give you a Wikipedia article on each new demon every time you see a new one, forcing you to sit and read in a moment where you'd rather be smashing heads together. I used to work at a company that hated UX. They despised user input, and they dug their heels in hard about making the smallest UX changes. Instead, on every page on their monolithic system, they had a question mark button in the top corner. When you clicked that button, you would have full pages of plain text describing to you everything on the page and how to use everything on the page, in words users couldn't understand. That was it. It often made users more confused, and as the UX designer, I received the brunt of these complaints. If they just made the pages from the ground up to be usable in the first place, this just wouldn't be needed. User experience is all about catering to the general experience of every single user, but also accommodating the needs and wants of those key personas. Speedrunners might be a niche community, but they're a loyal community and they will play games for years, often picking up sequels because they're accustomed to the game's mechanics. They also advertise the experience to potential players if they stream it for those years, so new players will buy the game based on that. Achievement hunters will buy games long after they're relevant and will often pony up for DLC too, so they're going to be playing games long after relevancy. They also explore every avenue of a game, so they need a game to be robust and functional, with good challenge and solid payoff, with intact servers and DLC that is still available to buy. Returning players, people who might not have played a title in a few years, might need a tutorial that can be skipped once they've refreshed themselves. They might be advanced enough that they want to skip forward to their favourite bits or locate their favourite places. Story-wise, they'd appreciate nods to other installments in the series, or hints about future installments that they'll have played since. Bethesda has one of my favourite personas ever, and one that is basically just unique to them: the Skyrim lifestylist. Someone who picked up the game years ago and still enjoys it as their main game with thousands of hours in it. This is a crazy unique persona, one that absolutely intrigues me, and to accommodate for this, Bethesda re-released their game with small improvements occasionally, but also cultivate an extremely healthy modding scene, and even make some mods official parts of the game itself. But like I said before, you don't have to accommodate the wants and needs of every single persona. Your game will quickly become a bloated mess if you add every detail they want, but it's good practice to accommodate the needs of every persona as much as possible. If you don't meet their needs, they just don't play it, simple as. Adjustments vary in size, from control scheme changes, which are huge, to dialogue alterations, which are small, but a small adjustment will feel like a jarring change without proper support for the user. User experience isn't just pop-ups and written tutorials. I've seen a lot of people saying that UX isn't important in Fromsoft games. We don't need more pop-ups, we don't need NPCs telling us what to do all day, we don't need hand-holding. Yeah, you don't. That isn't good UX. Lots of words, lots of hand-holding, lots of explanations. That's bad UX. That's the designers having to straight up tell you what to do rather than build an intuitive experience from the ground up that is easy to use. A bad user experience is anything that adds friction between a user and their goal, and if trying to reach a goal makes a user frustrated or unhappy, then that's bad UX. If a user is trying to play a Fromsoft game and they suddenly have a Navi implanted into their left shoulder, driving them mental over the course of their playthrough, that is bad UX. And again, I don't mean in terms of getting annoyed with a boss, that's game design. Getting annoyed with merely interfacing with the game is where user experience factors in. User experience is the control scheme, the map design, the in-game language, the menus, the onboarding, the learning, the payoff, the feedback, the direction. And the best UX is UX you never notice. You might be surprised to know that Fromsoft has really solid UX. There's been solid UX across the entire series, most of the time anyway. Sometimes they pick up brilliant UX practices and then drop them in the next installment. installment for no apparent reason. I will never understand you, Fromsoft, but I will try. And over the course of this video, I'm going to discuss some of the ways Fromsoft implements some amazing UX, some of the ways they seriously lack in the UX department, and finish on one final question. Does Elden Ring need an easy mode? And before I begin, there will be no spoilers for Elden Ring beyond the first few hours. We're looking at the experience of a new user here, so we don't need to go beyond Limegrave. Mainly because this video would be far too long otherwise, but also yes, no spoilers for Elden Ring beyond the first area of the game. There will be spoilers for all the other Souls games though, so tread carefully. So, what's so special about Fromsoft UX? Well, when creating a user experience, we are aiming for two key things. We want the experience to be functional, and we want the experience to be pleasurable. We want the user to achieve their goals in a way that they enjoy. Luckily, games are geared towards pleasurable experiences, so Fromsoft has a head start there. However, there is one more corner to this triangle: loyalty. When both happiness and function combine in the most optimal way, we get loyalty. But there are other facets to loyalty too. Perception of value. Have you ever heard an Apple consumer talk about the products they use? They tend to make some very loyal customers. There's reliability, returning to something repeatedly because you know you always get the same experience. The Neo series is an absolute bastion of reliability. What you go for you get in droves and in exceptional quality. Neo is based all around combat and the game delivers, to the point where fans will aggressively rebuff any criticism around the game. They are a doggedly loyal fanbase. And finally, there's meaning. Users who have an experience with something so unique, so incredible, that this series means something deeply personal to them. It's a hard phenomenon to replicate, but due to the difficulty of Souls games, this meaning is often found at a click moment, when the game suddenly makes sense. It's often found when a user finally reaches an ending and they see that final cutscene roll, knowing they conquered an experience they never expected to be able to. A first successful co-op, being summoned into another player's world and seeing their excitement when you beat a boss together, a first successful speedrun, a first no-hit run. Every persona will likely have a different moment of meaning, and thus the top of the pyramid is fulfilled in different ways, and Fromsoft receives a level of customer loyalty most companies can only dream of. So for the sake of this video, we're going to focus on two main personas. The two main personas that seem to be central to the whole debate surrounding Elden Ring and its UX: new user and advanced user. So, who is our new user? We're going to define a new user as a user playing the first 10 hours of Elden Ring. As a result, this video again will only discuss the introductory few hours of Elden Ring, nothing more. I know the game improves as time goes on in many different ways, but we are looking point blank at the first few hours of gameplay here. The goal of our new player is simple: to have a successful interaction with Elden Ring. Successful interaction can mean a lot of things. Essentially, I mean it as them playing their fill. If they want to finish the game, that's their success. It can just be to play it until they get bored, it can be to understand what all the fuss is about, to see the sights, to try all the bosses, to get all the trophies. The new player's expectations are vague, as this is their first time playing, so as a result they're harder to record and harder to fulfill. But they are likely to find something on the way that appeals to them, they just don't know what it is until they find it. Our new player needs to be able to play the game, they need to know how to interface with the experience at a fundamental level, and to be able to see the results of that knowledge fed back to them. For example, if they learn how to fight, they need to eventually see the fruits of their practice. They might also need much more support than advanced users, just little bits of help along the way. They need to feel progress and have that progress fed back to them in the form of success and levels. Our new player wants to be fulfilled by the game. They saw it was rated 10 out of 10 on so many review sites, and they want to know what everyone loves about this. I think that's fair. No one ever makes a game not wanting people to have a go and enjoy it. Let's face it, the Souls series are about as niche as FIFA is nowadays. People see their success, people want to see what it's all about. People want to finish the game too. I think that's a fair thing to want, and everybody is certainly entitled to try. But what is our new user going to be at risk of getting hung up on? Well, lots of things. Namely, frustration. If a user cannot use the game, they will be frustrated. If a user doesn't know where to go, they will be frustrated. If a user wants to experience more of a game in line with their effort and their learning, but cannot for whatever reason, they will be frustrated, as they're not getting a successful interaction within their goal. And I reiterate, I don't mean frustration as in, this is a challenge I am unused to, having to learn boss patterns or figure out next steps. This is frustration as in, I do not know what to do nor how to do it, and I feel like an idiot for even trying this game. Throwing users out into the ether and leaving them to flounder builds resentment, the opposite of loyalty. You don't want to make your users bitter, you want them to understand what's expected from them and approach their challenge. If a user gives up with your game, you want it to be because they acknowledge the challenge is too much for them, not because the game shoved them away by being inaccessible. One key thing you need to remember about new users is that you don't need to be a chef to know that your food tastes like shit. You don't need to be an expert in something to know that something is wrong or something isn't working well. You might be less able to articulate the how and the why it's not working, but new users are just as able to perceive cracks in design as advanced users. They're just less able to explain why. So our goal as a UX designer is to make those first 5 hours as frustration-free as possible. And as I said in the introduction, frustration-free doesn't mean easy. Frustration-free doesn't mean you one-hit bosses or skip segments if they're too hard. It means that when approaching bosses and segments, merely interacting with the game shouldn't cause frustration. Controls work as they're expected to, game expectations are communicated in one way or another, and the player is getting feedback on their actions in-game. And when Fromsoft took on an open world, the circumstances of these needs are wildly different to their usual projects. But something has stayed consistent from previous installments: the advanced users. The goal of the advanced user is also to have fun, but with their existing experience of the prior titles, they will have expectations from previous games. These expectations are easier to record and manage, being that their expectations are shaped by their experiences. They might expect to fight cool bosses, see awesome visuals, or reach certain endings. Can do. That seems easier to fulfill than the wants of a new user and their vague whims. Advanced users also need to be able to interface with the game. This is easier for them too, since they already have knowledge of previous games and how they work. If there are any changes from previous games, advanced users need to be notified in some capacity or eased into it when the time comes. Advanced users want to feel the same feelings they received in the other games, experience the same awe, have the same challenge and payoff, but in a new setting with new visuals and mechanics. They want to recreate their moments of meaning, but in a new situation. One thing about advanced users, especially loyal ones, is that they are resistant to change. It's natural. They like the bits that they like, and they don't want that to be different, but they also don't want their moments of meaning to be lost. Achieving endings, finding secrets, playing co-op and PvP, these moments have existing meaning to advanced users, and they're very protective over the moments that made them loyal to the product in the first place. If a less experienced user critiques them, they will often be met with hostility. So on one hand, we have a persona that needs a careful easing in, but has less expectations and therefore is easier to please, and on the other hand, we have a seasoned user that needs less help, but will have tighter expectations. Even if it's just, I wonder if there are fights like Ludwig and Slave Knight Gale, it is an expectation. Those tighter expectations will often overflow into aspects of the game they feel neutrally about, or aspects of the game that were hostile to them when they first tried. It's a weird kind of stubbornness, the idea that someone can have it easier than you after you struggled with it, the idea of, well, I dealt with it, so you have to. Honestly, progress is progress. We should always aim to improve experiences, and letting go of that stubbornness is key, but the reality is that advanced users do feel indignant about new users getting any help that they didn't when they played, so changes have to be subtle or clearly useful enough that advanced users can make the best of them too. That's the pitfall of crafting loyalty. Less well-adjusted users will revoke their loyalty if they see what they believe to be unearned success in new users. Like older sibling syndrome, where older siblings see younger siblings getting more freedoms and less chores, probably on account of their parents learning lessons about parenting, to be less strict, to let younger siblings enjoy their childhood more, but it does evoke bitterness. And as the older sibling who had her first job at 15 years old, I can say I understand that very well indeed. So let's talk about UX in the Souls series. Controls are the most fundamental part of the game's UX because they are literally how the user physically interfaces with the game. There is no more foundational thing in games than the controls. FromSoft has always been roughly consistent with controls across the Souls series. Dodge has always been circle, light attack has always been R1, heavy attack has always been R2, block is L1, parry is L2, unless you're not playing on PlayStation, in which case that probably makes no sense to you. On the other end of the consistency spectrum, players learn very quickly that pressing pause won't always pause the game, and then have to unlearn that with Sekiro, which is a surprisingly difficult thing to do, whereas a new player playing Sekiro will have come from games with pause buttons and won't have an issue here. All of these details come together to create something called a mental model, and I love mental models. So picture in your mind an online clothes shop. You go in, filter your categories, and then begin looking. You know immediately what to do. You turn the pages left and right, you see an image above a price like an actual clothing catalogue. Now, this is a basic example of a mental model, where a digital storefront or mechanism is created to function similarly to how we use it in the real world, and that makes it intuitive to pick up and use. It's kind of like how we draw aliens as humanoid people with big heads, because that is what we know. The brilliant thing about gaming is that it is in such an infancy that so many of these mental models are not yet set in stone, but we do have some loose conventions. Triggers on a controller are for shooting, obviously, and analog sticks are always for moving. Triggers also act as pedals in driving games, with a similar haptic function too. Haptic meaning how triggers literally feel to use. I don't think any company quite yet has an agreement on which button should be dodge or jump, but Elden Ring decided to make the X button a jump, and that's the same as Spyro, so obviously in my mind it's canon, but if you come off the back of Skyrim, you'll expect triangle. I played Overwatch immediately after Skyrim and very frequently altered while just walking around. It happens. People get ingrained habits, it's hard to lose. Mental models aren't too bad and they can be adjusted too, and I feel like in the case of Elden Ring, both old and new players had some new things to discover and learn. Mounting horses with square to use the mount horse item, and then dismounting with L3, something many players associate with sprint or sneak, threw me for a loop. I feel like I pressed every button except L3 before I got there. It was the last thing I expected. This is probably the one time that new and advanced users are on even ground. Elden Ring is alien enough to them both, control scheme wise, and we love a bit of equal footing. On the whole, Souls tutorials are both good and consistent, except for Dark Souls 2. Now, what's a good tutorial? Dark Souls 1, definitely. Firstly, it's unmissable. In my opinion, a tutorial should be skippable, but it shouldn't be missable. When you're introducing a new player to a game, especially one as enormous as Elden Ring, you need them to experience the tutorial. They need to know how to play the game. That's just fact. But we also need to account for players in New Game Plus, players restarting a game to speedrun it or make PvP builds, or returning players. So it needs to be skippable, and this is where Dark Souls 1 and 3 thrive. Tutorials are written using the same messages on the floor that players use to communicate with each other, building an association with these messages and guidance, and making it all the funnier when you leave the tutorial to find a sign telling you to jump next to a cliff, or illusory wall in front of an absolutely not illusory wall. It gives you a flavour of that Dark Souls cheek as well. I think it's wrong to call Dark Souls unfair. There are a few dickhead moments in that game, sure, but game designers love being dickheads, and every game has a dickhead moment or two, but it definitely sets you up to be prepared for the moment of hilarious craze you'll experience when you accidentally fall down the new Londo elevator. The tutorial is also really well constructed. You're in a contained area, the Northern Asylum. You're walked through some corridors with messages on the floor with simple instructions: how to hit, how to dodge, how to block. You pick up more items as you go, shields for one, and to learn how to use a shield, you walk up a tight corridor as an archer shoots arrows towards you. There's a rude introduction to boulders, a nice meet and greet before you naturally struggle through sends, and then you meet your first NPC of the game, Oscar. Oscar tells you about a prophecy, but really this is just the game's way of telling you what you need to do. He gives you a basic task of linking the flame, and it's up to you to go from there. This will later be compounded when you arrive in Lordran by the Blue Warrior, who tells you to ring 2 bells, above and below, but it's a really effective way to get you on some kind of route. You continue through the asylum and return to that boss you scrambled away from previously, but now you have the tools and knowledge to beat them. You just need the practice, the trial and error, unless you're introduced to the final component of the Dark Souls template: trying again. With your first success against the demon, no matter how many attempts it requires, you taste your first win, that sweet Souls adrenaline, and head out into the big wide world on the back of a badass bird. The Dark Souls tutorial is an example I would give for an ideal tutorial. It sets you up perfectly, combat-wise, lore-wise, and vibe-wise. The triple whammy, nip and tucked, a nice slap on the arse, and it sends you on its way. This is something that Dark Souls 2 really missed the boat with. Some anecdotal evidence now, but I would be interested to hear if anybody else had anything similar. As many returning players will know, Dark Souls 2 was not as popular as Dark Souls 1. It was a huge departure from the formula, and it really didn't excel in some of the areas Dark Souls 1 had been particularly strong in. As a result, it was very cheap on the Xbox 360. I remember wanting to buy Dark Souls 1, but at the time it was worth almost 50 quid, so I bought Dark Souls 2 instead. I remember I'd seen some screenshots of Hyde's Tower of Flame, and I wanted to get some of that sweet Cena Russie. So I dropped in with an approximate knowledge of Dark Souls and got to work. Now, creeping through things betwixt, skipping past many of the enemies in a panic, I must have accidentally tapped the D-pad arrow and put my weapon away, because I was suddenly running around fists swinging. I sprinted past a bunch of old women and out into a narrow bridge and saw to my left and my right a row of fog doors. And what did I know about fog doors? Boss fight. So, terrified, I decided to come back later for this apparent boss gauntlet. Presumably, I assumed the game front-loads you with a series of impossible bosses that you have to come back later with newfound skills to beat up, and, well, I mean, God knows what was going through my head. I sprinted out went to Majula, met a pack of pigs, and died. Grand. I respawned and decided to take things slowly. I tried to find the start menu. I went into my inventory, found a weapon, and tried to equip it. I couldn't. I went to my equipment tab, clicked around a bit, and eventually equipped an axe that I didn't have the stats to use. I navigated over to my stats page. VIT? ADP? INT? I was confused. I went near the pigs again and tried to hit them with my axe. They killed me. I put the game down for 2 years. Even coming back to the game and finally heading through those fog doors, the tutorial text for Dark Souls 2 appears on weird plinths, like headstones, not co-op messages. So what does the Dark Souls 2 tutorial do wrong? Users are intimidated away from the tutorial by fog doors, users are directed along a main path that encourages them to skip the fog doors entirely, with the tutorial itself being on optional, literally branching paths, and users associate learning with the gravestones, which never appear again. The Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin tutorial even has some of the fog doors blocked by statues that you need a dentastick to open. Ingenious, in the most literal sense of the word. Elden Ring unfortunately sits on the Dark Souls 2 side of this wall. As you walk into the first room of the game, you see a corridor on the left with some stairs leading up, and you see a pit on the right that, if you drop down into it, you won't be able to get out of. The tutorial is the pit. I saw quite a good number of people saying they missed the tutorial in Elden Ring. I mean, that's just anecdotal evidence. I never did an official survey, so I don't know if it was just my particularly dumb circle of friends, but I missed it too, despite going into the game specifically to explore every nook and cranny. Now, why is this? Well, we can perhaps attribute it to Western reading direction. We read from left to right, so we tend to approach things from left to right when we're consuming information. You explore the left corridor first, and then bam, you're out in the main world, and then there are a lot more lefts to suddenly be taking. We can attribute that also to lighting. The tutorial route is not lit up, but the tunnel out of the ruins is. Lighting is subtly used in loads of games. Keep an eye out next time you play any title, where designers add light and colour to the direction you're supposed to be going. More obvious examples include games like Mirror's Edge and the Uncharted series, which use red and yellow respectively, but almost every game teaches players to take the lit route subconsciously. It can also be the fog door effect. Peering down into that pit, unable to see what's inside, is a damn bit more intimidating than walking up some stairs. It's commitment, you know, jumping down a hole into the ground that you can't crawl out of. That's intimidating, especially for new players. Our new player persona might just have hopped into the game because they heard it's a 10 out of 10, but they've also heard that it's really hard, so jumping down into a situation they can't escape from is something the more cautious would want to consider properly first. It could also be a case of assuming that the game is going to pull a fast one on you. People might just think that that is a bottomless gap that you can fall into and just die. It could just be there to mock you when you first start the game, like, oh, you were a bit too trusting and now you're going to be punished for it. Compounded by the ghost in the chair next to the pit telling you to take the plunge, even I assumed I was going to get debated, so I decided to come back to this scary optional area later. For a game that's about to fling you out into the world with nothing but a wooden sword to your name and an old Victorian nightdress, a tutorial is fundamental. Moreover, once you're in there, it's pop-up city. Not a deal breaker, but signs are better in my opinion for teaching players to read signs when they're out and about and associate them with trust. Signs can moreover be taken at a user's own pace, they don't disrupt the flow of gameplay, and they introduce players to the broken language used in signs when people try to communicate with limited fragments of phrases. Also, advanced players running through the tutorial again to grab some extra souls can ignore signs, they don't need to bother with them, but pop-ups are something that they'll be desperately trying to get off screen as they rush through. And before somebody in the comments tells me, it's actually intentional, it's supposed to teach you to explore, piss off, you willy burger. You don't hide a lesson around a corner and then tell people they missed the point by not finding it. That is bad UX, and I should know. As Fromsoft's first open world game, they had a whole host of existing mechanics to translate into this setting, and a whole new host of mechanics to introduce. They also had an existing horde of advanced users to transition over to the open world format, whilst accommodating and encouraging new users to pick up the series here, right at this point. You see, Fromsoft games have always been semi-open world. You'll usually discover a hub area of some kind, such as the Hunter's Dream in Bloodborne, Dark Souls Firelink Shrine, and Demon's Souls Nexus. These hubs will have a spiderweb of routes reaching out from them, getting wider and wider and more complex the further you explore down them. Imagine the world of the game being like a tree with the branches getting thinner and thinner as they split until you reach the leaves, except instead of leaves it's Dark Lurker and you've only got 4 human effigies. So in a way, Fromsoft have dabbled in having content grow and become more complex, but usually within a tight structure. The way that Fromsoft typically structures their in-game worlds involves a stretch of exploration followed by a boss. Occasionally, there'll be branching optional side paths to varying levels of secrecy, ranging between the basically unmissable Cleric Beast to the tucked away Martyr Ligarius. Most paths aren't truly linear, there's always something to look for. That stretch of exploration will contain smithing materials in line with the damage you should be outputting, be them shards, chunks, or slabs, depending on how far through the game you are. The enemies you encounter should give enough souls to level up even a little bit, and those enemies will typically have movesets that future harder enemies will use, or movesets that will be used by future bosses, unless they're thematic enemies like the Wardens of Irithyll dungeons, in which case they're just there to batter you both ends. This means that bosses are basically final exams for that area. If you're strong enough to pass, you can go to the next area, like if you had to take a test at the end of a chapter of every book to prove you've been paying attention the whole time. Bosses in the Souls series grant access to the rest of the game if you can beat them, and the level leading up to them is very carefully crafted to allow that. Moreover, when Fromsoft does give the user a selection of routes to take, they are very, very good at directing those users towards places they should aim to go first, and subtly telling them when they should soak up the sights for now, but probably come back later with a bigger arsenal. When you land in Firelink Shrine in Dark Souls 1, you're faced with 3 routes you can take. You can travel down to New Londo, you can travel through the graveyard into the catacombs, or you can travel up to Undead Burg. A new player might not know where to go immediately, but they'll soon find out. New Londo is instant death for a new player. The ghosts there take no damage from you, but they sure as hell can hurt you, so it becomes a very quick lesson in futility. It won't take long to put a new player off here, that's for sure. Why? Because there's no feedback. The player has learned how to fight now, and they know that when they successfully fight, enemies die. The enemies don't die here. There's no feedback. It's clear that there's no feedback, so the humble player picks up sticks and moves on. The catacombs are a little bit wavier, a little bit less impossible, but who here doesn't know someone who made it all the way down to Tomb of the Giants by accident on their playthrough? If you really want to go and kill Pinwheel and get access to kindling straight off the bat, the game will allow that. That's something that they'll facilitate for the sake of advanced users. A new player isn't expected to persevere down here, but sometimes they find their way there. See, the catacomb skeletons can be killed, but they will resurrect a moment later if you aren't using the correct kind of weapon, a divine weapon. There's one divine weapon early game, guarded by a dragon. Again, an option more for advanced users, or can be crafted with the blacksmith after giving him 2 embers that technically are available to you now, but again, it's not something a new player will just find and know immediately what to do with. Again, the game is playable and accessible to new players, but rewards the pre-existing knowledge of advanced players by leaving useful items in the world to be found and used by someone competent, not someone feeling their way through the game for the first time. And there are so many moments like this in the Souls series that politely but firmly tell a new player to turn around, but are still available for an advanced player if they want to test their skill. Ceaseless Discharge is available after beating Keylag and needs to be defeated to give access to the demon ruins through the lava. Gwendolyn can be accessed before Ornstein and Smo with the Dark Moon Ring. Even the DLC, an end level area, can be accessed after the Lord Vessel is used, roughly mid-game. The way that Dark Souls handles its own linearity is by adding layers of depth to a world that deserves to be combed over again and again with new knowledge. A new player will tackle it methodically, but an advanced player can do it however they want. Both players get the challenge they need and walk away satisfied in different ways. Strategies like this are really clever. They show new players all the places they will eventually be going, introduce them to the mechanics of the game, but direct them in ways they'll feel like they're making more progress in. But they allow advanced users the freedom to pick their poison. If they're returning on New Game Plus, they might have the items they need to get by, but even with a new character and items like the Master Key in Dark Souls 1, advanced players aren't throttled for the sake of lightly introducing new players. It's the same in Dark Souls 3 with the Basin of Vows. If you can beat the Dancer of the Boreal Valley, then go nuts, Lothric Castle is yours. Want to go to New Londo? Dragon Slayer armor? Fuck it, who cares? Miyazaki doesn't. And it's not just Dark Souls 1 either. Dark Souls 2 introduces you to the late game boss Vendrick, who you can certainly go for without collecting any dragon souls, but he'll push your shit in hard without. It's the same geography-wise as well. Demon Souls is split into 5 very linear routes, each with 4 main stages. Demon Souls was a proto-Dark Souls in many ways, including this attempt at steering users in different directions, but it kind of shits the bed a bit by making the enemies in World 2 only weak to magic. If you try to go up into 1-2 and find everything takes less damage, and then move over to 2-1 to see if you need to be horizontally combing instead, but find out they take no damage either because you're not using a magic weapon, you might be confused. So it is intended, but it is confusing, and maybe it isn't telegraphed as well as it could be. But like I said, UX is iterative. I guess sometimes that iteration spans projects. Dark Souls 2 has good geography, in my opinion anyway, but the use of those statues is stupid, and the Shrine of Winter might be cool lore-wise, but gameplay-wise it's a strange choice. Both of those implementations are basically just fancy doors with special keys you have to go and find, and I don't find that to be a hugely useful way to lock off content, especially the statues. At least the Shrine of Winter makes sense and is cool in concept. It's the same in Bloodborne with the little handkerchief too. Sure, Sure, you have an option to kill other bosses or buy the napkin of gate opening, but that's basically the gimmick of the Shrine of Winter, albeit about 20 hours shorter. One strategy I adored, however, was in Sekiro. Sekiro was the first in the series that allowed players to swim, but you couldn't swim underwater until you'd beaten a mid-game boss called the Corrupted Monk. This means that later level areas are locked off simply by the environment, and unlocking this technique very subtly now allows you to access so much more of the map. The game doesn't have to arbitrarily gate places off. It feels like a completely natural development of the story, as Wolf now just has access to things he didn't before, which is immersive and a brilliant way to keep the player in areas that won't frustrate them. Too much, anyway. It also aids certain personas, like explorers and completionists, who will now meticulously comb over previous areas looking for items they'd missed under the water. The ability to swim underwater having been granted adds a second layer to the entire in-game world. It's a multifaceted way to address so many user needs whilst also appealing to specific users. The need to be faced with appropriate challenges and see feedback for overcoming that challenge is met, as the game simply directs you away from anything you can't do yet. You just cannot access it. Sekiro also has enemies who barely register your attacks because they're ethereal. The Headless, for example, makes it very obvious that you need a bit more practice and a shit ton of divine confetti before you bother them again. In Elden Ring, you take a few hits and you die, and it's up to you to understand whether you died because you and your weapon are underleveled or whether you just need more practice. In the first few hours of the game, when people really do need to be guided, there's very little in the way of that. In Sekiro, you would go up against an enemy you physically couldn't touch, or an enemy that one-shot you with a technique you'd never seen, and you'd realise maybe it's for the best to sling your hook and come back again later. Even the enemies with thrust attacks need you to buy the Mikiri counter to competently deal with them, and you get this off the Shinobi Arts tree, which is given to you by the sculptor after you earn one skill point, giving you a reason to explore the combat arts and encouraging you to adopt new techniques as you play. In an open world game like Elden Ring, this direction is more important than ever, and in a game like Elden Ring, where balancing is all over the place, having immediate feedback is absolutely crucial. Sure, you have a wall like Margit waiting for you at the end of the route you're supposed to take, but you do decent damage to him, and his moveset is easy to learn, so he's not the insurmountable struggle the Ghosts of New Londo are. He's definitely easy to overcome with enough practice if you're experienced enough with previous Souls titles, but it muddies the water there between the intended route and the red herring route he's clearly supposed to be. With the New Londo Ghosts, you have zero success. With Margit, you have varying success, even as a new player, but you never quite get there. The communication is unclear. Moreover, walking around the open world, killing trash units barely gives you souls to level. And where are all the upgrade materials? Unlike with the chapter-style template of more linear Souls games, where the space between bosses gives you time and space to level and build your arsenal, you're basically let loose in a big sandpit here and told to fuck off. Summon help, I would suggest, if this was a previous Souls game. Not here, necessarily. Crucial NPCs like Rani, who gives you the ability to summon, can only be found at a certain temple at night. Also, she can't be found there from the beginning of the game, so if you arrive at the temple at night off the bat, she won't be there. She begins to show up after you accept the story quest from the Finger Maiden, but the chances of you returning to the temple and at night? Slim. Very slim. And then you also have to see her, which is a surprisingly tough ask considering she's on the opposite side of the temple from the vendor, the crafting table and the blacksmith table, meaning you probably won't even be facing her. And she's the same colour as a maxi pad, so she blends right in with the night sky. All that happening in one go, all those planets aligning with no one to have to tell you to look there, that's rare. Without the bell she gives you, you cannot summon until much later in the game when her bell will begin to show up in vendor inventories. You can be given ashes without ever meeting Rani, and the item description says nothing about needing a bell to summon the ashes, which adds further frustration as users struggle to figure out how to use them. Not communicating how to use an item might be intentional, but it is bad UX. Just because something is intentionally vague doesn't mean it's not bad UX, it's just intentionally bad UX. To think a new user might have accidentally missed the tutorial, wandered right into Margit's arms and not known they could ever summon help, it's a line of rakes that they're just standing on over and over again. There's a difference between tough and rewarding challenge and pure obstinate refusal to introduce players to concepts and give them feedback on their efforts. Elden Ring also removes the familiar hub of the previous Souls games. The Nexus, Firelink, Majula, Second Firelink, the Sculptor's Temple, all these places are there from the get-go in previous games, whereas the Round Table isn't something you have access to until you reach an arbitrary grace before the gate to the castle where Margit is kept, probably the 7th or 8th one you find. The thing is, flasks recharge as you kill enemies, so when I found this grace, I personally deliberated heavily. Should I carry on with the flasks I have? I'll earn more health by pushing on, so I don't need to rest here and respawn all the enemies. I had to be told to rest there by somebody in chat, or I never would have known to do that. The gameplay encourages and rewards rewards players for pushing on without resting at graces, being that killing enemies gives you heals and resting at graces refreshes said heals, which might be full already anyway, and respawns all nearby enemies, so the chance that many players will rest here is actually quite low. This works for some, but it doesn't work for others, and it's a shame that it doesn't work for others, because it doesn't need to not work for others. I know I'm not alone in wanting to get more people on the Souls Roadshow. The amount of times I recommended these games to others only to get lukewarm reception tells me just how much these games shoot themselves in the foot. In an open world situation when this feedback is important, users are getting feedback all over the place, especially brand new players who have specifically been told to go fight Margit, have no prior experience with how FromSoft broadcasts the intended path, and will now not know whether they're supposed to butt their head against Margit for ages or just turn the game off. What if other places are even harder, or what if there's nothing nearby to do? What if Margit is the only content? Our explorer personas and our combat personas might prevail and keep going because they are naturally inclined to explore. Completionists might begrudgingly trot on and eventually find their moment, but new players take a while to find these niches, and if they feel as though they can't interface with the game, they don't find that niche, that purpose within the game, and they just don't carry on. It's called conversion. In the case of something like Spotify, it's similar to converting a Spotify freemium member into a Spotify premium member. Not everyone starts with the investment in the product to want to spend money on it, and not everyone immediately becomes a paying customer. There will be many factors, all slightly different per person: tolerance level for adverts and interruptions, number of hours listened per day, what they're doing while listening, whether they're at the gym or playing it at parties. All of these will impact whether or not a user will convert to a paying user on Spotify, and the same goes for Souls games. Everyone's conversion from a new player to an invested player to a categorized persona will be different, but everybody deserves a shot to find that, and not everyone will have the time to find that in the short period it takes them to get stomped by Margit. It could depend on many factors for a FromSoft crowd, similar games played before or games within the genre. A Neo player might acclimate far more quickly than a Resident Evil player, for example. It could be based on their own lives. Do they work one job or more? Do they have a child? Multiple children? Caring responsibilities? Do they try to limit their screen time? Are they neurotypical? Neurodivergent? Do they have visual, audio, or mobility issues? Do they share a console with siblings or housemates? Do they have other games they're trying to finish? How much time do they have? And how much time are they willing to budget for learning a new game that doesn't respect to feed back to them how they're doing? All of these and more will factor into the conversion rate of a brand new FromSoft user. If you plonk players down in a big field and give them no feedback on whether what they're doing is even working, you will lose many of them. And the first few hours of Elden Ring are an absolute arrow in the knee to much of this budding interest in FromSoft games. And I don't truly believe that a company like FromSoft wants to lose players. I believe it does want to convert them to loyal customers who will buy future products, DLCs, and merchandise. It's in their best interest to give everyone a moment of meaning. I know a lot of people insist that you're supposed to learn the game and figure this all out for yourself, but people are just gonna Google it. How many people actually figured out how to join the Dark Wraith Covenant in Dark Souls 1 on their own? How many people actually got the usurpation of flame ending in Dark Souls 3 without being told how in advance? Who here actually did Siegmeyer's questline or Arnery's questline without help? Or did the ending with all the pissing rice in Sekiro? How many people found the Dark Lurker in Dark Souls 2 without checking online? Dark Lurker is a secret boss, sure, but there's a whole trophy that requires him, so he's not that secret. I once worked for a company, the same company I mentioned earlier actually, and we charged clients a lot of money to use our system. And as part of our system, we had an editor that you could use to build letters that would be sent out automatically. These clients were big businesses, and they had hundreds, if not thousands, of letters to send out weekly, if not daily. Letters could be coded to be specific to the recipient, so you would put in something like square bracket first name, and the system would make it so that the person's first name was there to prevent thousands of letters being edited and sent out separately. It automated the administration, which is essentially what our clients were paying for. It was cool, but you know what wasn't cool? It didn't work. The editor was broken and it just didn't function how it was supposed to. Our users who were paying money for our system were having to write actual code into the editor and mess around with it until it started to spit out letters. Like, they were having to teach themselves HTML and BB code just to be able to use the system that we were selling them to do their job. Our users complained about it endlessly, and we lost customers because of it. Big customers, like tens of thousands of pounds a month customers. You know what the leads on the project said? They said, what are they? Fucking idiots? Just tell them to stop moaning and Google it. Anyone can Google a bit of code, fuck's sake. Boo-hoo, they're actually having to think for once in their lives. Obviously, not ideal. Users shouldn't have to Google fundamentals about the product you're selling them. Googling builds, secrets, and Easter eggs, sure, that's optional stuff. But if Google is telling your users how to summon people and make use of a game's basic features, then you have failed to communicate communicate that to them. Everybody goes, oh, Dark Souls is all about learning the route and learning things for yourself, but only a small niche of players is actually going to do that. Most of you are going to Google it, whether or not you support this or not. In UX, if one person has a problem, it's probably a human error issue. But if lots of users have a problem, it is a UX issue. Previous games bypassed this merely by not needing an item to summon. Sure, Bloodborne introduced the beckoning bell, but this can be bought in the hub world as soon as you've met your first boss, alongside unlocking level ups, so you're encouraged, after discovering the dollars awake, to snoop around the shop and see what you can grab. But in a huge open world game like Elden Ring with a day and night cycle that directly dictates who spawns and how much support you get in your early game, brand new players really need to be finding these items, because they're the ones who need them, not having them hidden on NPCs that only spawn under certain conditions in places the player has already been. So I'm not the biggest fan of hypotheticals, but let's try one now. If you had your granny come to stay with you in your home for a long time, but she can't climb the stairs to go to bed in one of the bedrooms, would you fit a stair lift or would you make her sleep on the sofa? Sure, a sofa is a soft place to sleep, but it's not a bed, especially to sleep there indefinitely. It's in the living room, the curtains might not be fitted for that pitch black bedroom sleep, it's not a proper mattress. It might be in a room you want to use during the day. Also, like, it's your granny? Grannies deserve the best. And if your granny asked for that stair lift, would you really say, if you can't make it up the stairs, then just don't climb them, sleep on the sofa instead? Of course not. She's a person like you. She deserves the basic dignity of having access to the same experiences. Climbing the stairs to go to bed might be nothing to you, but it's demeaning to shrug her off and tell her to just make do with what she has. And if that stair lift does get installed, what does it matter to you? It doesn't stop you from climbing the stairs, it doesn't make climbing the stairs harder. If you knew that someone else had help with climbing the stairs while you have to do it by yourself, would you really be complaining that it's unfair that she gets it easier than you? All this time I've had to walk up the stairs by myself, you complain, and you don't even need to try? You haven't earned this. To assume that is to dismiss the gulf of ability between you. Telling dear old Granny Bear to just get good and drag herself up the stairs like you did is something she might manage with a great deal of pain and effort, but she's started on the back foot and has disadvantages you can't even conceive. She might also just give up halfway and go back to sleeping on the sofa, only now feeling humiliated, bitter, and worthless. As we said way back when, we don't want bitter users. The logic, obviously, is to get a stair lift installed. It's an extremely slow piece of kit. It takes her more than a minute just to get up a flight of stairs, but she can finally sleep in a bed just like you. It would be too clunky for you to bother with, but for her it's perfect. Now you can both go up the stairs, you can both achieve the same goal, and hey, maybe one day when you're feeling lazy, you can take the stair lift too, just for fun and see what it's like. Accessibility options in games are much the same. For people who are already comfortable with the experience, they're a useless bit of extra. When you're a competent user, tutorials just get in the way, pop-ups irritate you, and unskippable cutscenes wind you up. It can be really hard to see outside of your own experience and the bubble of your persona. Why would someone need bigger parry windows, you sneer? That's easy mode. Why would someone need high contrast mode? Part of the game is being taken by surprise. Why would someone need auto pickup? Part of the game is meticulously collecting everything. If you miss something, then you're being lazy. It's not. Plain and simple. But whether you know it or not, you're unable to see outside of your persona's experience. For a combat extraordinaire, bigger parry windows defeat the point of the challenge. Learning that timing is crucial and they want to master the craft. Having more lenient mechanics in combat defeats the point as far as they're concerned. If you can have bigger parry windows, then you're basically cheating, even when you're facing enemies that can't be parried or are using ranged attacks. For a high investment player, someone perhaps playing on a 4K monitor with their graphics turned up to 10, high contrast mode is a wasteful way to play this game. Fromsoft has put all of their effort into making a beautiful game and you're just going to make it look like a primary school painting? To them, high contrast means you're wasting the effort of the developers, not playing the way the game is intended, and cheating by being able to see distant enemies that blend into normal landscapes. For an explorer, turning every stone is their experience. Walking carefully through a world, taking each mile moment by moment, is their game. Carefully sifting through loot in a manner almost ASMR is how they get their fulfillment. Auto pickup means you're moving too quickly through the game, as far as they're concerned. Too quickly to be playing the game properly, at least. For role players, it's unrealistic for your character to just hoover loot up their arse. There's a lot of arguments I see about accessibility options, even the most basic kind, that often come from a place of ignorance. It doesn't affect me and I don't understand how it could affect somebody else, so it's irrelevant, is a paraphrased sentiment I see far too often, and as a UX designer, it fills me with so much rage that I have to close Twitter, because it is always on Twitter, and do something else for a bit. Is empathy really that hard to come by? In fact, there are tons of critically acclaimed games with a wealth of brilliant accessibility options. The Last of Us 2 has the most incredible wealth of accessibility options I've ever seen. Not only are there visual assistance options, such as high contrast modes, but there are also mobility assistance options that make enemies less aggressive, prevents them from flanking and chasing, and less aware of you while you're stealthing. It has arrows that point you in the direction of the game, listening mode buffs that help you find collectibles, and an edge assist that stops you from falling off the side of things. All of this on top of standard difficulty settings. You can have these enabled on easy for a wild ride, or you can use them to help you in grounded and permadeath. Marvel's Spider-Man is similar. You can enable longer parry windows, QTE autocomplete, you can change button taps to hold, you can have enabled chase assist, which gives you longer to chase enemies before they escape, and you can toggle on web burst, which stops you from needing to tap buttons constantly, as Spider-Man will fire 3 webs in one go. This similar burst style is also being adopted by Destiny 2 to prevent constant hammering of buttons to achieve the same effect as an auto rifle. Even the Dead by Daylight devs, Behavior Games, famous for firing one developer for saying no one cares about accessibility when asked about the colorblind mode during a live stream, are making leaps and bounds in changing animations to be less about wiggling sticks and more about holding buttons or tapping less furiously. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and actually now that I remember it, Silent Hill 3, oddly enough, allows you to set different difficulties for different facets of gameplay. You can have different difficulties for stealth, combat, exploration, and puzzle solving. In Silent Hill 3, selecting easy puzzles will get you a completely different gameplay segment. In Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, they both share an aim assist accessibility option. Any game that lets you toggle run instead of tapping and holding L3, an action I always feel is going to ruin my controller, has sneakily added an accessibility option under the guise of gameplay options, because honestly, the overlap is so big that they're basically a circle. And there are subtle ways to do accessibility too. Hades, for example, has no difficulty selection, but God mode gives you an immediate 20% resistance to damage. This resistance doesn't go far. If you take a lot of hits, you will die anyway, and without a good knowledge of the game and some solid prep, you'll never pass Theseus. But every time you do die, you gain an extra 2% to that damage resistance. The damage resistance buff maxes out at 80%, meaning you have to fail 40 runs to hit that maximum. Considering most people make their first escape anywhere between their 20th and 50th attempt, this would take longer to grind out than it would be to actually make that first escape. God mode is more of a placebo effect in a way. It keeps you feeling as though you're making progress every time you die, and it just encourages you to keep going. In reality, you'd probably manage it far earlier than you thought you would without God mode, but God mode helps people commit. Hades even offers a bunch of weapons that require different input styles, subtly accommodating for players with a variety of abilities. Finally, Celeste, a notoriously hard game, introduced an assist mode that slowed down time, allowing players to respond to harsher requirements more easily. Did anyone care? No. Well, the gameplay purists did, who now thought that the experience had been destroyed, but the more mentally secure player base did not mind now that the game now catered to people who needed help. The developer of Celeste could have said, well, maybe if you can't do the game, it's just not for you, go and play something else. But Granny doesn't need to sleep on the sofa. And they didn't, and their game is all the better for it. What you'll notice about all these accessibility options is that they are indeed just that, options. They don't need to be on, they can be subtly introduced to a game without breaking the status quo, and you can enjoy the game just as much without them. Bottom line is, the more options you have in a game, the more people will play it, period. Finally, I want to ask you a personal question and challenge you to consider something about yourself. If you've heard everything I've said today and are still against making these games more accessible, why? Whenever I see people complaining about these games becoming too easy for others, my question is, why do you care? I would challenge you to consider that your main enjoyment of the games, your main point of pride, is being able to finish something that other people can't finish. Your value on the game and your validation as a player is so tightly wrapped in being better than other people are at doing a game that you stubbornly dig in your heels at the idea that someone else might be able to do the game with a bit more help than you. Because you see, everyone has a different experience with the Fromsoft games. Some people solo it from start to finish, some people no-hit it. Some people like to experience the game in its purest form alone because overcoming that challenge is their moment of meaning. Some people summon for every boss, some people summon for a few bosses, some people will just summon for one boss, but they'll summon for that one boss every single time they arrive at it. For some people, just reaching the end of the game is their moment of meaning, regardless of how much help they needed to get there. Some people reach the end with tons of help, then load up the game and solo it. Some people go back and help others with the boss, helping others find their moment of meaning is their moment of meaning. When I first beat the Capra Demon, I finally did it solo. I was over the moon. I then sat my sign down outside his room and helped other players with him for days. The first person I was ever summoned by was somebody with a French username, and when we both finally triumphed over the Capra Demon, we were fucking psyched, pelting around his little arena until we turned to dust. This was my moment of meaning. Was it his? Probably not. Everybody's different. Some people get their friends to help them. I went round to my friend Tom's house and I did Ornstein and Smo for him. Later on, I had him come over and do the 4 kings for me, the first time I encountered them. I was hammering away at them solo for hours and I just couldn't do it. I was losing my mind, so my friend came over and he did it for me. My first playthrough involved a lot of help, from NPC summons, summoned co-op partners, and from real life friends. I did a ton of Googling as well. After my first playthrough, I soloed 5 more playthroughs of Dark Souls, 2 on the PS3 and 3 on the PS4. It was easier than asking for help, more convenient to just run through it myself and get it done. I no longer needed the assistance. In Dark Souls 3, I summoned for Nameless King every single time I fought him, despite soloing every boss in Dark Souls 3's DLC. For everyone besides a few hardcore elitists, summoning in the Souls series is a-okay. But you see, summoning for bosses is just as much of a crutch as accessibility. Both are optional. Let's say you summon for every boss. In theory, you've only earned 50% of the ending yourself, because you've split that effort down the middle. Let's say you summon for every boss and have every accessibility option toggled on. Maybe now you've only earned 25% of the ending yourself. You had a lot of help, but you still got there. But what if you summon for 0 bosses and have all the accessibility options on? Well, now if we quantify it like that, we've earned 75% of the ending. At what point is a person ineligible to earn the ending of Dark Souls? Why is summoning help okay? Is it because it's part of the game? But if accessibility options are part of the game, then suddenly that's cheating? Suddenly that's unearned success? How much help is somebody allowed to receive before they are no longer eligible to say that they've played a game? For those of you who've made use of accessibility options before, you'll know that you don't compulsively put them on either. It's not like a drug that you get addicted to. For my first playthrough of The Last of Us 2, I didn't use any accessibility options. For my collectible cleanup, I put on an option that let me press L3 to see where I needed to go next, and an option that showed me nearby collectibles. You could say that defeats the point. You could say that the collectibles are there to be searched for, but let's face it, we all Google collectibles when we're looking for them. If it's not an option within the game that helps me find them, I'm gonna go to Power PYX. For my grounded playthrough, I used every accessibility option and it was still hard as nails. For my permadeath playthrough, I used the one where you can't fall off edges because I kept dying on that bit where Abby's walking on the sky bridge. The options were useful, but there are many parts of that game where you can't rely on them. If I went on to play it again, I'd maybe have 1 or 2, but not all of them. Does it mean I didn't finish it on grounded? Hell no. Even with those options, loads of people don't make it through grounded. I still did it, I still achieved it. I went back to The Last of Us 1, which has no accessibility options, but with the practice I got in The Last of Us 2, I had an easier time. Nioh 2 has more options than Nioh 1 that make the game easier. I played 2 first, then sailed through 1. If I'd tried 1 first, I'd have probably given up. I always refer to Nioh 2 as Nioh 1 but with training wheels. It's a series that gets easier as it goes, but the challenge is still really intense. For my hard mode playthrough of Spider-Man, I didn't have any accessibility options at all until right at the end when I toggled on bigger parry windows and nothing else. You'll find that for comfortable players, toggling on accessibility options is genuinely more effort than just playing the game. The more you enjoy the game, the more you simply can't be asked to add them in because you just don't need them. People who don't need crutches don't walk with them because they're more effort than just walking normally. People who do need crutches, however, always walk with them. Sometimes they might even need a wheelchair for the harder journeys, but they're still journeys they make themselves. You're not going to say somebody didn't go to Plymouth because they did it in a wheelchair. In what situation is a person who has carried through every encounter in that game right to the end worth less than somebody who needs larger parry windows or dumber enemy AI but still solos the game? There's a lot of digging in heels around making these games more playable for a wider audience, but the truth is that these games have always been different for everyone. Everyone needs different help, be it looking on Google, summoning 2 NPCs for Pontiff Sullivan, or bringing a team of sweaty PvPers into the fight with Dark Eater Midir. Whether your playthrough was 1% help, 20% help, 50% help, or more, you still achieved it, and everyone should be able to say that they did it. So, does Elden Ring need an easy mode? No, obviously it doesn't. But that doesn't mean the experience can't be fundamentally improved for every player with some very minor differences. Considering this video examines the first few hours of Elden Ring specifically, there are so many moments where players needlessly fall through the cracks, and the audience is bottlenecked in a way it doesn't need to be. Currently, Elden Ring has such a narrow view on accommodating a niche of players. The existing advanced players with prior knowledge, and the new players tenacious enough to fight through the opening few hours. They do try a bit to ease new players in, but as soon as you're out in that open world, it's a roll of the dice whether you'll continue to play past the 90-minute mark. You might see it as a good thing that you have to earn your fun with Elden Ring, but I don't. I think that suffering just to play a game for the sake of suffering is needless. Making a game challenging is one thing, and as a lover of the Crash Bandicoot series, I am well behind making games challenging, but making merely interfacing with the game a challenge, specifically adding friction to the user experience in the most meta term of the word, making the game something you just grapple with until you give up or break through, is unnecessary. People who have broken through that wall doggedly defend it, having had their moment of meaning and not wanting that to be ripped away, but with proper balancing and proper accommodation, those moments of meaning will continue to happen for everybody and for more people as the game becomes more playable. Accessibility options that could be toggled on, greater visibility of direction, better feedback for the player, more implicit communication, all of these things would go enormous lengths towards improving the experience for everyone without sacrificing challenge and those moments of meaning. Considering the amount of UX improvements that have slipped under the radar over the years and made a more enjoyable experience for it, I think you would be surprised at how many of the dogmatic fanbase would appreciate good changes to the experience as long as the challenge they play the game for remains intact for them. Thanks for listening to my UX deep dive into Elden Ring and the Souls series as a whole. Like I said in my introduction, I've been a UX designer for almost 4 years. I love talking about all things UX, and I love the perspective my career has given me into examining games through a lens of user experience. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and hopefully you learned something interesting today. If you'd like to see more UX deep dives in the future, let me know. I also post tons of other gaming content here on my channel, reviews, rankings, discussion, so if that sounds like fun, please subscribe to me here for more. Once again, thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next one.